Hello everybody, how are you? Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. That's nice. Have you been having a good morning?
Yes.
Ish. I heard quite a lot of enthusiasm from over here and quite a lot of apathy from over here. Okay, hi, I'm Ollie Double. I'm here to do a lecturing demonstration. As you can see, this is where you're going to be. Obviously, if you've never lectured before, that might be a scary idea or a kind of an idea that's going to make you go, woo, power. I don't know. It's up to you. But let's talk about a few things. First of all, what kind of behaviour should we be expecting of students in lectures? I mean, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on this, but this is quite interesting, this photo, because, oh, there we go. Now, one thing that you could normally expect of students is to turn up on time. If you noticed that, I did. But this is quite interesting, this photo here, because I got this from, and I forget where now, but another university. And this was their picture on their website saying, oh, look at our exciting lectures. But actually, if you look at it closely, it's got a bit of activity going on. For example, this one here is talking to her mate, so she, right? This guy is so bored he's got to leave. Right? This guy is so bored he's watching the guy who's got to leave. And this lecturer seems blissfully unaware. She's kind of just looking around. So this is the kind of exemplary picture of a lecture where chaos is going on. And so if we were going to think about what ground rules you'd want when you're lecturing, I mean, you may have lectured already, you may have already got some ideas on this, but what kind of ground rules would you suggest? Anything got any ideas on that? Yeah, that's a very good one. And you demonstrated that very well as well earlier on. Okay, turn up on time. Good. What are the suggestions?
Turn off your mobile phone.
Oh, yes. How annoying is it when a mobile phone goes off just when you're making a killer point in a lecture?
Attendance.
Just turning up, yeah, that's good. Any others? Any other ideas?
No eating.
Yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, are the rules about lecture theatres?
You shouldn't eat in lecture theatres.
Yeah. Yeah, no eating. Eating can be off-putting, I think, in lecture. I mean, depending on how many courses they've got in front of them. Here are some ground rules I prepared, at least what I thought about when I was preparing this lecture. Arrive on time, yeah. Turn off your mobile phones. That's a very good one. No talking amongst yourselves. I mean, I think it's okay if you set them a task, you know, for them to talk amongst themselves. That's absolutely fine if it's within the parameters of the lecture. But I think if you've got, particularly in a lecture of this size, with this number of people, if you see two people at the back chatting, incredibly off-putting. Because I mean, there's always the paranoia you think they're talking about you. Or that you're so boring that you need to talk about something else. I mean, either way it's rude. Actually, it's happening there. Unbelievable.
Definitely loud.
Yeah.
Very good.
But you have to get up pretty early in the morning. Okay. Okay. So no talking about yourselves. I mean, the thing is, I'll come back to that as a point because I don't think that you have to be a complete fascist with students. And I think if somebody well, you can be if you want. I think
so many people are.
Okay, it's too lively. But how you enforce rules is a different matter. I'll come back to that point. No sleeping. Anybody else had that experience at 9 o'clock? Somebody's just comatose? Or what's really quite fun?
I think if they sleep without snoring, it's fine.
Hold on. Obviously, you can set your own ground rules. I would say that's a little bit too liberal. You can sleep, but just don't disturb it.
Yeah, don't disturb anyone.
But it's disturbing to me. You know, I mean, actually, what's even kind of funkier than that is when, apart from somebody actually slumped over the desk, is when you can see them just about to go. The eyelids getting heavy. Anyway, no. But I mean, that is quite. I'll come back to that point about sleeping. This is. from a great book written in the 80s about political oratory. Now, I think that political oratory shares a lot of features with lecturing in universities, and I think this is a terrific quote for sort of, in a way, laying down the basic problem, in a way, with doing what I'm doing right now. Public speaking has an immense potential for boring audiences, as is well known to anyone who has ever fallen asleep during a speech, sermon or lecture. The problem arises from the fact that such talk goes on for an extremely long time, compared with the modes of speaking used in the course of most human communication. Talking too frequently or for too long tends to be regarded as a highly undesirable characteristic and provides the basis for complaints that a person hogs conversation or is long-winded, rambling or boring. Speeches and related forms of talk can therefore be seen to represent, almost by definition, a potentially unreasonable imposition on the tolerance of listeners, at least until or unless the speaker is able through his performance to prove otherwise. I think that phrase, a potentially unreasonable imposition on the tolerance of listeners, is kind of damning, but it's quite a good one to hold in your head because it makes you aware of the problem that you're dealing with, which is how to engage people and get beyond the fact that by definition what you're doing is kind of weird. Okay. This is another form of communication which I think shares a lot with lecturing. And this is Tony Allen, who is an anarchist, who was one of the first alternative comedians. And he wrote a very good book about stand-up comedy and related forms of performance. And this is, I'm going to read you a couple of bits from that. A stand-up comedy performance involves direct communication with an audience, performing rather than acting. A raconteur comedian walks on stage relatively naked. He speaks directly to the audience in the first person. The audience are spoken to, conferred with and confided in, and more importantly, their responses are acknowledged. Stand-up comedy therefore has two agendas: performing material, plus all the business of delivering it to this audience on this particular occasion. I think that, all the stuff it says about, what you're doing when you're lecturing, applied to this as well, that you come on, you're as yourself, therefore relatively naked, you're speaking directly to the audience in the first person, you speak to them, you confer with them, and you confide in them. And the two agendas is, in some of what they talk about is the material, the prepared material, the gags. And that's the first agenda, performing material. And the other agenda is performing, in this particular moment, right? And that's where picking up on what's going on in the room is quite important. And that's exactly like a lecture. In a lecture you have the material, which is the content, if you like, the things you want to impart to your students, but you have to actually impart it, and that's partly about being aware and being in the moment. Addressing the now can sometimes require more than just a cursory work in the room. There are those occasions when an external event demands so much attention that a failure to deal with it reveals the deceit and nullifies the potency of live performance. For the comedian, this amounts to a dereliction of duty. Now what that's talking about, addressing the now, is all that stuff that I've been doing really since we started here. So acknowledging latecomers, acknowledging when people talk amongst themselves, interacting with people, asking questions, picking up on when people have commented about wanting to be fascist or whatever it is. All of that stuff is, in Tony Allen's argument, is what a comedian needs to do to establish him or herself as being, having the right to be up here. But there's no reason why, as a lecturer, you can't do the same. Because, after all, if somebody is snoring so loudly that everybody's looking around, if you don't acknowledge it, you won't get the respect and attention of the room. Okay, so here's the thing about ground rules, going back to the point about not having to be a fascist. They can be explicit or implicit. I don't really kind of start the first lecture by saying what rules are we going to have. You can do that though. You can say to the students what rules are reasonable for us to have in the lectures, and you can draw up a list. And then in a way it has more sort of moral authority when somebody breaks those rules to actually come down on them a bit. But you don't have to do that. I don't do that. But that is a ploy you can do. But either way, there's no point in having rules unless you enforce them. And the thing about enforcing them is that word enforce sounds a little bit, going back to that point, fascist. But you can enforce rules by being humorous, as I pointed out with the latecomers and what have you. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's quite democratic. It's quite informal. Okay, and I personally think that the best way of enforcing rules, whichever approach you want to take, is being totally aware of what's going on in the room. That can be quite tricky because you've got a split focus. You've got the focus of you know, your content, and you've also got the focus of, well, there's all these people, they've got to be engaged, okay? So you have to be able to break out, even if you're in the middle of a tricky calculation, if you can break out to deal with something if it happens, if it needs dealing with, that's better than just standing with your back to people while you work through what's on the board, but aware of the fact they've all gone to sleep now. And that's one of the ways I think you can get beyond the problem of, because what you don't want is it to turn into school. Do you know what I mean? You don't want to be like, I'm the head teacher now, boy, back of the room, you know. You don't want to get into that nonsense. So if you can avoid coming across as being, you know, a strict teacher, I think that's probably better. Right, informality and identity. How do you feel when you're faced with a lecture theatre full of people staring at you? Anybody got any thoughts on that? Ooh. Powerful. Yes, absolutely. Any other thoughts?
There's something important I want to say.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah. So, yeah.
Very exciting, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
You better know what you're talking about.
Yes. Yeah, that's really, really true. Yeah. So you've got to have important things to say, but you've got to know what you're talking about too. Okay, you feel powerful or excited. Anything else?
Nervous.
Yeah, absolutely. Any others?
Quite intimidating.
Yeah, it can be quite intimidating, absolutely. I'm going to put some things up that I've thought of. Nervous, self-conscious, dry mouth. Anybody ever had that? Awful. Actually, I got it right now, weirdly. But the self-consciousness of being in front of people staring at you, especially in the first lecture of a series, especially if it's your first ever lecture, that's quite a pressure. An imposter. Anybody ever felt like that in lecturing or life? I think that is, I think if we could get that monkey off our back, we could create utopia. I think the fact that we live with this feeling that, oh, we're not good enough and so on is but I mean, this goes back to the point, you better know what you're talking about.
Yes.
You know, that you feel you have to be the fount of all knowledge, right, when you're in front of students, and if you show any ignorance at all, it's a sign of weakness. But, you know, you're not an imposter. Everybody here is against me and waiting for me to. Has anybody ever had that feeling? Well, it's just that speaking to an audience is supposed to be one of the most popular public fears. And people, you know, I used to do stand-up. People used to go, oh, it's such a hard job. You're so brave. And you kind of go, hard job is a surgeon, brave is a fireman, or a soldier. I just get up in front of strangers and try and make them laugh, you know. But people fear speaking in public, and I think one of the reasons is because it goes back to the imposter point, that it can make you feel that everybody, you know, people talking amongst themselves, but normally it's just because, I don't know, they've got something important to say or whatever. It's not actually the worst thing in the world. And I said before, it makes you think that they're bored, or it makes you think they're talking about you. But that's because I think that being in this position is naturally, yes, it can be exciting, it can make you feel powerful and so on, but it can naturally make you feel insecure and paranoid, including the AV. Who has had the experience of the AV equipment failing only in front of a lecture? Yes. In fact, just today, this is the first time I've come in and put my memory stick in one of the computers since they've upgraded to Vista. And I've just went through the slides, and I've got some audio clips later on. And for some reason, this version of PowerPoint has decided to not let me open them because they're not registered. Why?
Yeah.
What possible reason would people whose only job is to make IT work not have addressed that problem? But you know, that only is going to come up like 10 minutes before you're due to start. So having insurance policies of when the AV equipment goes wrong is quite a good tip. Right, with all that in mind, who would like to volunteer to try something?
Not volunteering.
Okay.
Before you jump into this topic, I want to find out what is the policy on internet browsing.
In what sense?
Student browsing while
Oh, yeah, that'd be really rude, wouldn't it? Or sitting with a laptop doing their email.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The dongle is there, now you
iPhone.
plug in and I know the lecture, so I'm just going through this, oh, I'm searching something. What do you do? What's the policy on?
Well, I suppose the point is, I think the policy is what you want it to be. Personally, I wouldn't really want to put up with that, because I don't see why they would be there if they're busy doing something else, or Facebooking or something, you know. Why would they be there? You know, it seems either be there and listen and participate, or I mean, that's for me, but I think you could make your own choices. I mean, it might be that you kind of go, well, internet browsing, they might be sort of, you know, Googling something you just said. I wouldn't put up with that, but I mean, you know, it might be that it depends on what you're doing, whether you think it's appropriate. But I think that the key thing is that you need to know what you think, because I don't think there is a university-wide policy on a lot of these things. It's just what you think is right.
No, I asked this question because I come from a different culture where there's a different teaching style.
Okay.
We don't tolerate. Simply no.
Yeah, well then that's fine. Then
So-
that's your policy,
Yeah.
I think.
Well, I think you have to be quite careful with that, because I go to a lot of conferences.
Yeah.
And I've noticed in the last sort of
Yeah.
couple of years, a lot of people use laptops to take notes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're definitely.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to, you know, split it between people who are using Facebook or
Mhm.
taking notes, you have to actually check each individual computer. That would be
You could do it.
You
No.
couldn't do it.
I mean, I think what you could do is just, I mean, you know, it's not a question of necessarily policing things. I think what you could do is just explain, you know, if there is a culture of students using laptops to take notes, I think that, you know, the thing where you can just explain that's acceptable, but, you know, using Facebook is not really. Okay, I do need a volunteer though. Hey, come on up. Let's give Simon a big round of applause. This is an exercise I do with students, okay, so if you don't just want to stand in front here.
Yeah.
What I'd like you to do, it's really simple, it's not a big challenging thing at all, but what you do I think will be really useful to everybody. So all it is, I want you to have a conversation with the group. So what qualities does a conversation have? Well, it's interactive, so you don't need material as such, because you don't have material in a conversation really. You can ask them stuff, we can all ask Simon things, and a conversation will ensue. The only weirdness will be that it's in front of a formal audience, as it were.
Okay.
Are you up for that?
Yeah.
Let's go.
Okay. Well, why don't we? First of all, my name's Simon O'Leary. I live locally in Herne Bay, and let me. We're all here for different reasons, and perhaps we can explore those reasons. Who, for example, here works here full time? Yeah, that's quite a few. And who's part time like myself? Oh, a few less. So that's interesting. So maybe you're doing the same thing as me, just doing the course, and maybe in time will become full time there. And who, for example, is based solely here at Canterbury, or maybe go to Medway or elsewhere? Anyone here on the Medway campus? Oh yeah, so there's a few of you. And at Medway, do they run this course or?
I don't know, but as far as I'm aware, it would be only if there were sufficient numbers, and I guess
Okay, and is that the same for the rest of the Medway folk? Yeah, and just generally, I don't know if you guys from Medway have been over to this campus before. What do you think? What's the Medway campus like? Maybe you could tell us a little bit about it.
It's much smaller.
Yeah.
And it's not purpose built. It's obviously been redeveloped out of an old site, so you do have very much a sense of being on a historic site.
And I imagine some of you guys don't even know where Medway is, so.
Brilliant, thank you. That's brilliant. What I want to do is to just sort of think about what was going on in that, for want of a better word, performance. So, if we had to use adjectives to describe who Simon appeared to be in that very particular situation of being in front of a lecture theatre full of people, what adjectives might we use?
Relaxed.
Okay, good.
Questioning.
Yeah.
Rather than, questioning. But that's how you start a conversation anyway.
Yes, okay. Okay, but kind of assertive in putting questions. Okay.
Inclusive.
Inclusive.
Yes, good. How did you read the inclusivity?
We're addressing different people, inviting responses, not just talking about himself or
Yeah.
looking at one person.
Okay. Anything else?
Engaged.
Right. Good. Any other observations about that as an interaction?
Well, he took it from a sort of a general thing, like everybody had to put their hand up for one reason or another.
Yeah.
And then brought it down to something that was more specific.
Yeah.
Talking about particular individuals.
Yes.
I seem quite interested in the answer, which sometimes
Yes.
doesn't help.
No, that's very true, very true. And of course there are two kinds of questions. There are questions which are put to the group, for which, you know, hand up is the appropriate response, and there are questions which are put to to the group, but with the view that individuals will answer them. There is a thing in stand-up comedy that if you ask a question and somebody individually replies, it's quite a good idea to repeat what they've said or to summarise it for the rest of the room, because sometimes it's a big venue and you can't hear it back. It also gives the comedian time to think of what but it also means that everybody knows what has been said, you know, and everybody's on the same page kind of thing. I mean, I think in a room this size that's unnecessary, but it's just worth thinking about. And I think if you ask a question and you get a response, you have to you do need to acknowledge what's being said and in a way try and sort of link it back to the theme. Any other observations? Yeah.
I thought you sort of seemed quite comfortable just sort of standing up and taking a leading role in the conversation.
Yes, I think that's very true. I mean, I thought it was great because although what I was asking you to do was simple, it's not easy, if you know what I mean. I mean, the idea of what I was asking you to do was simple, but actually getting up with no preparation to speak to a bunch of people you've not met before is, you know, tricky. And actually did it really well. And actually what I thought was, what I noticed in the way you were, was that you were kind of like a relaxed teacher in a way. That the relaxed bit came about from things like, well, just your general demeanour, you didn't seem too floored by the thing, but also by the fact you started off by saying, I just live up here, and a little bit personal detail. The teacher bit came from the fact that we picked up fairly instantly that this was a kind of formal mode of presentation in a way, but this came through people putting their hands up. Whereas when I was asking you to do things earlier, you were laughing mockingly because you read a different style from me, you know. But that's fine. There is no right or wrong way of doing things. But what there is there's better and worse ways. And the worst ways are when somebody is so kind of tight and sort of unaware of the room and tense that they're not communicating well. Any way that actually, you know, indicates communication. It doesn't matter how formal or informal. Actually, it's whatever works that is engaging, really. But I think that question of who you are when you're in front of people watching you is quite key. And if you can get into that a bit, if you can get some intuition on who you appear to be when you're in front of students, that's going to help you, I think, because it defines the whole of what you do, really, I think. Okay. Picking up on that point, this is from Tony again. Standing on stage in front of a live audience is a situation that appears to trigger a sort of strategic identity crisis. In order merely to survive, various sides of our personality come to our assistance. However idiosyncratic or inappropriate these minority personalities appear to be, they should all be given an audition. And I think that there's nothing wrong with you know, taking out aspects of yourself that, you know, happen to come out when you're in this situation and sort of just, you know, consciously or semi-consciously playing on those to be a particular person when you're in front of a group of people. There's no cheating or dishonesty involved in that. I think that's quite good, because at least you have a. I think to have thought about it is better than not to have thought about it and just come across as being a bit sort of crusty and formal or whatever. Okay, and I think that how this works in stand-up, I'm going to keep coming back to the example of stand-up comedy because that's my own sort of area of interest, really. But I think the analogy between that and lecturing is fairly clear. So I think there's three things that a stand-up comedian defines early on in his or her act. The first is who he or she is. I mean, not necessarily who they are generally like, but who they appear to be in this situation. The second is who the audience are. So comedians will often comment if they feel like an audience is particularly posh or rowdy, or they have a particular kind of local quality or something, and then they'll often play on that and play on the, in a way, how the two are connected, the discrepancies or the similarities between the performer and the audience. With that in mind, those tricky audio clips that I was mentioning earlier, this is Tom O'Connor, who's a sort of Scouse comedian who you know, still around. You see him on TV doing quizzes and things nowadays, but he used to be quite an interesting stand-up comic in the 70s, playing at working men's clubs with a particularly big following in Merseyside. And this is a clip from about 1975, if it works.
Bless you and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And I must say, it's nice to be at McGull Country Club, particularly as I know I'm sitting amongst nice people who are proud people. Because aren't we proud round here? Proud of our town, huh? Proud of our kids. True, isn't it? Because our kids are clever. Like, they're so clever they'd hang you. The mother in the butcher's with the little lad. She said, "Can I have some of them scraps for the dog?" And the kid said, "Oh, goody, we're getting a dog." We're proud, of course we are. We're proud of all the things we've got round here. The way we talk, the way we can speak any language. Have you noticed how we can do that? Doesn't matter what the language, we can talk it. Wait till we get into this common market. My God, there'll be trouble there, I'll tell you. I mean, I'll go so far as to say that you can take a fella from round here, put him in Europe, in any country, don't tell him where he is, and he can still speak the language. You've heard our lads when they go abroad, haven't you? You-o. Bring 2 meal, 2 large Bacardis, a half a lager, and 2 Coca-Cola.
Okay, very different kind of. Well, perhaps we'll talk about him first. Who does he appear to be? Who are the audience, and what's the connection between the two?
The Scousers, aren't they?
Yeah.
Is that what you meant?
Well, that's part of what I mean. Yes, it's McGull Country Club, so you're talking about that part of the Merseyside, broadly speaking. But who is he? He's one of them, right? How does he indicate he's one of them?
We.
Right, good. Yeah, excellent. Anything else?
Well, he's deliberately doing that because he's then, you know, that the jokes are on them. So by identifying with them,
Brilliant.
he's saying we're
Absolutely.
making a joke on ourselves.
Exactly right. Yeah. So it gives him license to make fun of the audience by saying, "Well, I'm exactly like you."
Yeah.
But that's one ploy. This is a very different ploy. It's Bill Hicks, an American comedian who was big in the early 90s. And this is a clip from a show in somewhere like Pittsburgh in the early 90s. And you'll hear a very different connection with his audience.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you're doing well tonight. I'm glad to be here. I've been on the road doing comedy now for 10 years, so bear with me while I plaster on a fake smile and plow through this shit one more time.
So who is he and what's his connection with the audience? Well, it's the opposite, is it? That's the whole point.
So are you recommending to start lectures?
Yes. No, I'm not really. But having said that, it might be quite interesting. If you pull it off, to play the very high status, cool cynic could work. You know, if it's part of you. I mean, I think if you faked it, it'd be disastrous. And I think this is a slightly risky strategy because people get terribly offended. But on the other hand, it's all choices that you can play with. You know.
I had a teacher say something like that to the class once years ago, and it didn't go down well at all. It was a bad
You have to. The thing is, you know, it's a high risk strategy, isn't it? You know, that if people get the joke, then it's great because you've broken down an awful lot of barriers. On the other hand, if they're not in on the joke, then it makes you look like a complete prick, frankly. You know, so. But I think that actually takes us nicely into this question. Try to remember what it was like when you were a student. How did you feel as a student? What were the kind of feelings that you had being a student engaged in your academic activities? Got any thoughts on that? Yeah.
How could you possibly have an opinion?
Yeah.
And
Okay.
That
that's a really good point. Yeah. Anybody else?
Excited sometimes.
Yeah.
If it's a good lecture and you think, oh yes, this is going to be excellent.
Absolutely. I think that's really true as well. Anything else?
Looking for windows to clarify and engage, because that means you often the lecture is one way.
Yeah.
So you like to stop and explain.
Find your own way in. Yeah.
Interact.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's good.
When the lecturer made you feel like he or she cared,
Yeah.
you feel much more enthusiasm and you actually pay more attention.
Very true. Very true. Any other thoughts?
Really, you were waiting for it to finish. You got something more important.
Okay. Okay. I think that's actually a very valid point. I've got some thoughts here I've jotted down for this one. This was me thinking about what I felt like when I was a student, and there were quite contradictory feelings. I did feel excited at times, stimulated, full of ideas as well. Like, you remember how it felt when you read something that you came across that you'd never thought that way before, and it was just could make it be quite almost disorientating sometimes when you come across a new idea. It can throw your view of the world up in the air, but also bored at times. I think that's inevitable in any human activity. Tired as well, and I think that's something we should think about particularly now, because most students have jobs now and they're juggling, what you were just saying really, juggling with different things going on in their lives.
And they hardly as well.
They do, yeah. Like an imposter as well. Everybody felt that as a student? Yeah? Or just me, maybe. And yeah, going back to the first point, afraid to speak in case I reveal my ignorance. And that's something that I've come across with students an awful lot. Tell you a story. I was teaching my lecture course on stand-up comedy quite a few years ago now, and there's quite a lot in there about subversion. So about week 8 of a 12-week module, somebody puts their hand up in seminar and says, sorry, what is subversion? Now, that student taught me a very valuable lesson, which is that, because actually, it's not like everybody else went, oh, she's useless. Everybody else went, yeah, what is it? And they've all been too afraid to ask, because by asking, you're revealing your ignorance, and you're thinking that everybody else knows, and I don't, and I'm useless, because I'm an imposter. And I think I think if we can keep these things in mind, we can start to understand an awful lot about why students are the way they are. I think that but it's very easy to get to a them and us mentality when you're a lecturer. Oh, students haven't done this, they haven't collected their feedback, they haven't, they're stupid when they come from schools now. What do they teach them nowadays? All this kind of thing. And the thing about it is, I understand the frustration sometimes with students, but on the other hand, that's what's going on with them is complicated. Sometimes, if you understand why they've fallen asleep in the 9 o'clock lectures, because they were actually working till 2 a.m. because it's the only way you can pay the way through college. You perhaps have a little bit more sympathy, and it makes it feel a bit less them and us. And I think it go back to that point about feeling paranoid in front of a room full of people. If you realise that the reason the person's fallen asleep is because they're actually very tired, rather than or they might be partying, rather than you being exceptionally boring, then I think that makes it a little bit easier really to cope with that feeling. Here are some ideas about connecting with students. Be informal. I think that, I started by saying hello today, which might seem like an obvious thing, but actually saying hello in a genuine way can, in certain parts of academia, be so unusual that just saying it gets a laugh. You come out and you go, hello. People just laugh because they don't expect to try it at a conference table. But why should that be? Why shouldn't we be friendly? That's how you start a conversation. And I just have this very strong memory of being an undergraduate in the 1980s. And Ken Livingstone, when he was head of the GLC, came to speak to the student body, the Guild of Students or whatever. And the first thing he did, and I remember this, it's over 20 years ago, rather than doing all that sort of nonsense about, oh yes, and thank you for inviting me in, and all that formal stuff people do at the beginning of a speech, he just went, in 1981, and he was bang into the middle of the material, as if it was in the middle of a conversation, and I just went, wow, that's amazing, and I remember it over 20 years later, so I think, you know, informality, whether it's saying hello or just banging straight into something really exciting, I think can be a really good way of connecting. Addressing the immediate situation, I've already dealt with that. Try and find out who you are when you're in front of them, I've dealt with that. Read the room. This goes back to the point I was just making before this slide. If you know why the students are doing what they're doing, it's not nearly as scary. If you know that it's because they're feeling like they're nervous, that they have no right to an opinion or whatever it is, then you understand their reticence to answer a question to them. And I think this is a really kind of key point. There is this sort of feeling, I think, within academic work that if you take the humanity out of it, that's somehow better. But I kind of disagree with that. I think that if you don't just talk about the content, but also your own personal reaction to it, I think that makes students feel a little bit less vulnerable, a little bit less like they know nothing, like they don't have a right to an opinion, and a little bit more like this is something they can do. So, for example, if I've got a lecture and I'm reading a quote out, for example, I'll often say, I'm not completely sure what that means. What I think they mean is, well, or I remember how I felt when I first read that. Or, you know, I completely disagree with that, it's absolute nonsense. Or, isn't that one of the most exciting things you've ever heard? Or, don't you think this phrase is lovely? You know, I think all of that stuff, what you're doing in a way is demonstrating your own process, which is something you want them to be able to do. Yeah. You see what I mean? You want them to be able to emulate what you do. And that is what you do, so why not do? And it's the same, I mean, I'm talking about, my examples are humanities based, but I mean, I would imagine it's the same with formulae and calculations and so on, because surely when you first work out how something's done, there's a kind of excitement there, or puzzlement, and I think that there's no harm in sharing that, actually. I think it's very positive. Okay, lecturing as theatre. Fact. Most lecture theatres are relatively poor performance spaces, right? This has no ambience at all. I mean, oh, look at that concrete. Also, there's a bizarre thing about lecture theatres, which is, well, for a start, you know, this is in the way. I mean, what is this? It's like if I want to address you, I've got to go like here and then be really close, or I've got to have this as a barrier. There is one solution, actually, which I don't recommend, which is you could do the whole thing from here, but you've got to risk assess it, obviously. Anyway, the other thing is that you go back to the feeling of sort of feeling vulnerable in front of you know, a group full of people. When they're coming in and they're just filing in. It could take 5 minutes, and they just stare at you. And it just feels, you know, it can feel weird. What you could do is hide behind the and you feel ready. Hello. It's just an idea. Anyway, there are things you can do. There are things you can do to ameliorate it. I think one of them is, I actually really like PowerPoint because you can create a theatrical backdrop for what you do. You know, if you're talking about a particular, let's say you were talking about a particular philosopher and you've got a woodcut that you found on Google image search or something, put it up there with the quote, and it's like, it's a nice visual kind of thing that's perhaps a little bit more interesting than looking at you for a whole hour. And there are a few things you could try with this, like this. You could be as cheap as you like. I mean, that makes it look you like, or you may not want that. You might be wanting to sell something. That's my thing. Or you can just do silly notes. I mean, you know. The other thing is, PowerPoint gives your lecture a structure, so you don't have to work from a verbatim script. And it makes sure you don't forget to say anything. See, I'm saying this right now, aren't I? It's a good little sort of aid memoir. Right, one of the most effective theatrical techniques in terms of engaging an audience is audience participation. And here are some things you could try. Ask them a question. Two kinds of question, open or closed question. A closed question, obviously one that has a single answer. Open has multiple answers, and most of mine have been open today because that, you know, leads you more possibilities of talking to more people. This is quite good. I like this one. You can break them into groups to discuss something and then feed back to the whole room. Difficult if you've got a really massive lecture. If you've got 500 people, that's possibly impractical. But you could certainly do this size. Even if this lecture theatre was full, you could do this size. And how I would normally do it would perhaps have like half of 2 rows. People can sort of turn around and discuss things with each other. Just give them a couple of minutes and then feed back to the group. But that's a good way of, especially if you put it in sort of halfway through or something, when they're just starting to get the heavy eyelids and what have you. Put a joke in, that's something you can do. Allow them to ask you questions. We had earlier on the thing about, you know, internet browsing. That's fine. I mean, I'm happy to be interrupted at any point, really, to answer questions. You may not be. It might be very off-putting if you're in the middle of something very difficult to break out and answer questions, although what you can always do is say, I'll come back to that in a moment, as long as you remember to do so. And the other thing is, we've sort of come up with this already today, but you can address an individual or the whole group. And I made the point earlier that if you talk to an individual, it's important to make sure that everybody's heard. And actually, when you reply to the individual, it's quite a good idea to, as well as looking directly at them, to also share your eye contact with the rest of the room to make it clear that actually you're talking to everybody in response to that particular question. Okay. That's the books I've referred to. Have we got any questions? Yeah.
I've got a question. Like, this is quite a small lecture theatre, so you can kind of do it without a microphone, but I know I'm going to be having a lecture theatre that's quite big.
Yeah.
I'm terrified of using a microphone.
Yeah.
What can be done?
That is really tricky. Mic technique can be quite difficult, and it depends on where the mic's situated, but it can mean you've got to stand still rather than being able to move around. I'll tell you a really, really good tip, and it's something that I'm going to do, particularly having identified that problem with the audio clips on here, is what I try and do before a lecture series begins. If you go for your first lecture and you've got technical issues, you've normally got a maximum of 5 minutes to resolve those, and it can take 5 minutes just to set up your desktop on the computer. You know, when you log on, it just goes, spends 5 minutes thinking about it. What I personally try and do is go to the lecture theatre beforehand, before term starts, get Campus Watch to give you the key. They will do it. They're perhaps a little bit reluctant, but they will do it. And just go in and try everything that you're going to try technically beforehand. And if that means practicing with the mic, practice with the mic. And the thing about mic technique, the thing about mics being intimidating, they're only intimidating when they're unfamiliar. It's a tool like any other. If you practice using the tool, it's much less intimidating. Yeah?
It's particularly important because if you are lecturing in a theatre where it's cross-departmental, for instance, electronics, would not take your password. It's because the electronic department has a great system, and that happened to me the very first lecture. The password wouldn't fit.
It's horrific,
because we've got to get a special password from them, which I didn't know. So we'll go around and find a person, you know, Monday morning and blah blah blah.
Yeah,
it's always good to go early.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, all those kind of teething problems are an absolute nightmare, and it just makes you wonder why systems work the way they do. But yeah, I think that's a really good point. Any other questions?
Would you, seminars, would you be completely different?
Well, I think that relates to the issue of what is a seminar as compared with what is a lecture. I mean, for me, seminars have to. You can have interaction in a lecture, but for seminars, that's the point of them. If you see what I mean. So you have to build in activities, I think, which lead to interaction. And of course, it is different anyway because you're generally people sitting around tables, and you're sitting at one end of the room often. And that leads to a different mode. In a way, you're not performing as much because things like you're sitting down normally in a seminar. So I think it's very important to not let seminars become just like an extra lecture as well, which is difficult if you've got a lot of people in your seminar group, obviously. But that's something to if you do get an unfeasibly large number of people in a seminar group, that's something to deal with within your department and suggest that perhaps the group size is reduced or whatever. But yeah, I think it is a bit different. Obviously, there's a connection between the two. But okay, any other questions? No, I'm reading the room. I'm sensing no. I'm sensing everybody wants it to finish now. Okay. Well, it's been very nice talking to you today. If anybody does want to ask me anything, then come and see me in a second. And thank you very much for your attention.